that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody. It is early in the morning, so there are trash can people, so if you hear that, apologies. Today, we have my thoughts, part 1, on Toll the Hounds, book 8 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, or Malazan, Book of the Fallen, by Stephen Erickson. This is, of course, Prologue, book 1, book 2, within this first half of the novel, because it's, of course, 1,000 pages. These books are long. What can I say non-spoiler wise? Or at least that won't cause a massive anything for you. We're back in Darushistan. We're back in Janabakis. It's almost like we're returning home from Gardens of the Moon. In some ways, this feels more like a sequel to Gardens of the Moon than even Memories of Ice did. But of course, this takes place after all the books we've already witnessed. But we come back to a lot of familiar faces. You know, Ralik Nam, Torvald Nam, if you remember from House of Chains. We have Malik, and not Malik, Murillo, and Kruppy, of course, is back. Animander Rake is a focus, along with a lot of the Tisdy Andy stuff in this book with what's his name? Namander Rake, and so on and so forth with that. A lot of stuff with this new thing called the Dying God, which is separate from the Crippled God, and we'll get into that in spoilers. And we have Cutter back, / Crocus, he's back. Some returning characters like Mapo, not too much of a spoiler if you saw literally the dramatic personae character list in the beginning of the book. Iscario Pust. And of course, because since his introduction, every modern day story has included this character, Karsa Orlong has returned, along with Samar Dev, along with a character from, if we're doing this publication-wise, Return of the Crimson Guard would have been out by now, so Traveler from Return of the Crimson Guard is in this book as well. So there's a huge cast of characters, as always, in these books. But it's also not a lot of the characters that we've been following for previous books either. It's very much a return home of sorts. And again, I don't fully know the plot that is happening in this book because I have not completed the book. But so far, it is very down to earth right now. Malazan can get pretty crazy, can get pretty out there, can get pretty, epic in scope, but this right now is pretty small scale. We're dealing with a lot of human stuff. This is very, I'd say this first half is very character-centered, very introspective, a lot of people thinking on either personal stuff or very religious / philosophical stuff. And that's kind of the first half of this book, is a lot of that. As to what the grander narrative is going to be, for me, I don't really have a clue what that's going to look like as of this moment. But I'm really enjoying it. I got to say, it's a very slow burn, though. More so than I think a lot of the others, because there's so much talking. And if they're not talking, then they're thinking. And it may be written eloquently and beautifully. The prose may be exquisite, but it's a lot of word salad. I mean, it is for a purpose. I don't think Stephen Erickson ever writes anything without having a purpose behind it. I'm just saying, though, if you're trying to be like, what's the plot of Toll the Hounds? I gotta tell you, I'm 600 pages in, and I'm not exactly sure. There's a lot of the usual politicking and assassinations that happen to Darushistan, because that just tends to happen a lot. There's this grander narrative thread that I believe will be picked up in the second half with the Dying God, which is for some reason separate from the Crippled God, even though the Crippled God is very clearly the overarching villain of the entire series, but we have not focused on him in this book. So I'm not exactly sure where we're going but it's been very kind of slow paced, I'd say, and it's very in the heads of characters, which I don't mind because I really like when um, Steven Erikson tends to get very philosophical or poetic. Sometimes it feels like he's very much like inserting his beliefs into the text a little bit, but it's still fantastic all the way through. It's probably so far this is one of my favorites that I've read so far. Um, but I can understand why that wouldn't be the case for everyone. I believe this book is the most like divided amongst people. I think everybody is in agreement that Dust of Dreams. Not that there's a single bad Malazan book, unless you just don't like the way the series writes, because there's a lot of people just don't vibe with, and that's completely valid. Like people that just don't enjoy the style of writing that Erikson goes for. You can also be quite indulgent at times, but if you like his indulgences, then there's a lot of great stuff here. But I believe Dust of Dreams is the one that pretty much everyone says is the weakest. Not that it's bad, just the weakest. But then that Told of Hounds is the most like divisive amongst fans, and whether or not they love it or they don't like it, or just like it less, I guess. I don't know. But non-spoiler wise, I think that's pretty much all I'm gonna say. The big thing is returning home to a lot of characters like Anamanda Rake, and Darushtistan with all those characters, and Krupi. There's also a lot of stuff that's kind of like teasing what we'd eventually get in the form of the prequel trilogy that Steven Erikson is writing, which he still at this point in time has not concluded it with the final book in the trilogy. No rush on that, I'm just saying. At this point in time, it isn't out yet. But it seemed like there was some teasing for that. Maybe it wasn't teasing back then. Maybe it was just, trying to expand the universe a bit, build upon things. But it didn't feel exactly relevant to the story being told now, necessarily. Felt more like, oh, well, this thing, isn't that interesting? Yeah, it is, but what does it have to do with Told the Hounds? Other than the fact that it relates to Christianity. So, but alas, that's it non-spoiler wise. Do I think this book is worth it? I mean, come on, guys. If you've read 7 of these books already, you've read several thousand pages of these books. Does it really matter what I have to say? You're gonna complete it at this point. There's no point in bailing out now. You're too far in. You gotta finish the game. So, I mean, I do think it's great so far from what I'm reading. I can't give a final verdict till I finish the second half, but I think it's very solid. And I mean, if you're this far in, you're gonna read it. So, but yeah, it is nice to be back home and to see a lot of these familiar characters and to see how far people have come. There are some other characters I forgot to mention, non-spoilery, but it's fine. Like Gruntl's back, and I haven't seen Gruntle since Memories of Ice, so it's very nice to see him again, and he's got a lot of interesting things going on, along with Stony and everything. So, but I'll get into that in spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, if you haven't read this book yet, and you just wanted to see my initial thoughts as I was going through it non-spoiler wise, this is basically it. I'm gonna get into the thick of books 1 and book 2. So if you don't want that, it's time to get out of here. So the prologue, we have Man and Woman Dead. I'm not exactly sure what I meant by that because I just wrote question mark. I didn't fully understand what was happening. We also get to see Edgewalker again for a second. And again, interesting because this guy was first introduced, as far as I'm aware, in the Esselmont books. We also have a wizard called Ditch. We get reintroduced to Absalar, the Lady of Thieves. Kroll, the Elder God, talks to Krupi. And Krupi is referred to as an old friend with him and Kroll. So how old is Krupi? And what is Krupi? We still don't really know. Also, a fascinating part of this book you will begin to realize if you're paying attention. Unlike every other book in the franchise, this book is seemingly in universe being narrated by Krupi, as if he's telling this tale. So that is interesting, or Kruppy, whatever. But then we head on to Book 1, Vow to the Sun. And we meet some new characters like Lady Vidicus and Dester Thrin. We get to be reintroduced to Picker, Ansi, and Blue Pearl. We meet some new characters named Shardin Lim and Hanat Orr. Murillo is back. Cole, if you remember Cole from Gardens of the Moon, he might have been in Memories of Ice, I don't remember, but he is now a counselor in Darushtistan. Baruch I'm just kind of going off of things that I was writing down in this portion. Baruch is reading like this ancient text, and it's debatable how much of it is actually trustworthy. I imagine most of it isn't, because when I read the prequel books, we'll see how accurate this stuff is. But Animander is seemingly wants to end Draconis's life, and spite the daughter. Not envy, because he had a romantic relationship, if you remember, with her. And something about 1,000 gods, whatever that means, if that's even true. Um, and of course, again, it feels like a millennia. We get to have Baruch having a conversation with Crone again, which is really fun. I really enjoy Crone. We meet this character named Endis Salon. I mean, they might have been in other books. I don't remember now, if I'm honest. But they're cool. We also have this person named the Sir Doman, who used to be a part of the Panion Doman. We also, this is when we get introduced to some of the younger characters. They would have been in Memories of Ice, not sorry, in House of Chains to a very small degree, because there's this whole section with the Tisti Eater and the Tisti Andy in that one scene. But we get introduced into Mander Golet, who is, like, I think a descendant of Animander Rake. We have Skintick, who is his cousin. We also meet Anarantha, Nienda, Desra, and this guy named Clip. And these are the survivors of the Drift of Ailey, of the Eater, again, from House of Chains. We get introduced to Spinnik Durov, who's kind of like a buddy, second in command, sort of, to Animander Rake. I should also mention at this point in time, because, you know, their city had fallen, you know, the Kachin Shamail floating city is no longer a thing, so they've been holding up on Black Coral, which is where I think one of those big battles happened in Memories of Ice. It's been so long now. There's also a lot of mentions of a sail, which is really interesting. And Animander Rake is like, is that something I should take care of? And they're like, no, don't worry about it, you're fine. He's like, oh, okay. A sail. What's that? Right, that's the final novel written by Esselmine, which, publication-wise and chronologically, has not happened yet. But I keep seeing a sail in these last couple books. I'm like, man, they keep saying the title of the book. So, Gruntle is back, which is great. Again, with Torval Nam. I get introduced to a character named Jorik Sharplands. I just wrote it down because that was such a specific sort of name that I didn't know if it might matter later. We get reintroduced to Spite and Cutter and Iscariel Puss, because of course they were all together by the end of, what was it, Reaper's Gale or Bone Hunters? I don't remember. And of course, Mappo is back, which is great, and he's now in Darushistan, and he's trying to find his way back to Lether, which is where book 5 and 7 took place, because he, of course, as he always does, he's trying to find his boy Ikarim, or Carium, wherever you want to put that. There's a fun scene with Raced, of course, the really quick villain at the end of Guardians of the Moon, and Rallick, and man, Raced is such a lonely boy. He just wants people to keep him company, and no one gives a damn about him. And again, Traveler comes back, which again, publication-wise, now I did read Stonewielder already. I did a review of that because I thought chronologically it would have happened before Toll the Hounds, which I think it does. Publication-wise, though, there would have been only 2 novels by this point by Esselmont out, which would have been Knight of Knives and Return of the Crimson Guard. But Return of the Crimson Guard introduces us to Traveler and his friend Eriko, who also gets mentioned in this book. So, if you were reading both these series in publication order, you would have read Esselmont's book around this time. We also get stuff with Endomandrus and his mother. It's fun, Mother Dark. Ducaire is back. If you remember at the end of Memories of Ice, he decided to tell the tale of the Chain of Dogs at the end of book 3, kind of recapping everybody that was in that bar, the events of the previous book. But now it's been several books since then, and I don't think we've really focused on Duque at all. But here he is, he's still chilling. And now he's completely disillusioned with history and is spiteful and angry over everything that happened. But I think we had epigraphs from him in previous books. So I think in the end, he will decide to write stuff still. But one of the things he says in this section is history meant nothing because the only continuity is human stupidity, which I thought was a beautiful quote. Now, kind of an awkward confrontation, but Cutter / Crocus almost kills Rallick because he thinks he's getting, attacked, but he wasn't. But it just really shows a stark contrast. This is also where a bit of a problem arises for a lot of Malazan fans, because I've looked it up. Because, to me, it definitely felt like there was a continuous stream of events that kind of naturally followed suit one after the other. Maybe months in between, but certainly not years. But the problem is that people established by Told the Hounds that since the events of Memories of Ice, at least, it's been at least 6 years. Which means the events of books 4, 6, and 7, because remember 5 would have happened either concurrently with 1 or before 1. So that means for 3 books, we've somehow spanned 6 years. And I don't know if that really, realistically, makes sense, unless someone can explain that to me in the comment section below. To me, it doesn't make sense. Perhaps we could argue God's meddling with time. I suppose we could make a case for that. I still don't understand how magic fully works in this world anyway, so I suppose I could buy that explanation, but I don't know how 6 years really makes sense, realistically speaking. That being said, it does show a stark contrast to where Crocus began in Guardians of the Moon to where he is now, though I don't think you needed a 6-year gap in order to explain that vast change, because war changes people. Croupy and Cutter / again and Crocus have a discussion on people changing and what that really means. I thought it was a great little discussion that they had on the nature of change and how, like, for example, I've been through a lot of stuff these past couple of years. I mean, nothing major like war or anything, or poverty or disease or anything of that great nature, but I am, in fact, have been through some stuff that is, for me, personally, while I've tried to remain the core the same, I am different. For the better, for the worse, I am uncertain, but I am not the same man I was just a year ago. Experiences, events, life will naturally, eventually change you. Compared to what Crocus has been through, I've been through nothing, but you can imagine why the atmosphere and the vibe you get by seeing Crocus back in this place where all of this started back in Guardians of the Moon is this feeling of not belonging. Sure, these are people who were close to him in the first book, and they openly welcome him back with open arms. They care about him, they love him even. But at the same time, he is so vastly grown and changed from the person he was that he can never feel like he fully belongs anymore. For example, some people move out of town when they grow up, move away from their parents, move into their own place, far away, to come back home to their hometown like 10 years later. But imagine your parents never altered your room. It remained exactly the same. Everything remained the same. The same friends you had in high school, they're in the same place. Maybe different jobs, but same people basically. But you've changed drastically. Or at least on the outside, on the exterior, it seems as if the people that you used to know have not changed in the slightest. But you can imagine coming home, how awkward that might feel. How unbelonging you'd feel. And so that's exactly what Crocus Cutter is going through in this portion of the book. We then have this fun scene with Traveler talking to Shadow and Cotillion, which again, just as these books continue to go on, we get little snippets of what the Empire was like prior to the events of Guardians of the Moon, which is really interesting, but also just the dynamic here. because I don't actually remember if this book has spoiled it yet. But again, if you're reading this publication-wise, Return of the Crimson Guard already came out. So, Traveler is Dasam Ultor. Right? So he was like the right hand, next to Dancer, he was the fist. I'd say it's more of a Mara Jade and Darth Vader thing for the Emperor, if we're talking about the Star Wars Expanded Universe, if you know what that is. And if you don't worry about the comparison. It's just Dancer was the scalpel. He's when he wanted to do things subtly, right? The hammer, though, Dasam, or Vader, for the comparison. But it was an interesting conversation the three of them had, as they're all sort of this... I mean, Cotillion and Shadow are gods now. They are ascended. They have become gods. They're no longer Caliban and Dancer. Traveler, I think is ascended. I'm not exactly certain about that. He's definitely more than just he was. But it's interesting seeing these three people who once knew each other in one... And again, this is another example of change over time, right? From what they once were to what they are now. They're not exactly the same people they once were. So it's also an interesting dynamic where people who used to be one way are now another and are interacting with each other. It's another interesting scene. Of course, I don't know if you would have known that if you hadn't read Return of the Crimson Guard, but oh well, these books are still super old. Regardless, get on it. We also learn that Traveler's goal is to kill death itself, to kill Hood. And then we move on to Book 2, finally, with Cold-Eyed Virtues. We have a spider god, apparently, who has plans for Mappo. But the plans include just letting Mappo do whatever it is he wants to do, but it's still somehow furthering this god's purpose. And I guess I spoiled it, because I guess we learned it here. But Mappo wishes to return to Lether. Very rough stuff. We deal with Stony and her rape back in Memories of Ice, and her child. She had a child that was a product of rape, but she proceeded to give birth to that child, but she immediately gave it up for adoption. She wanted nothing to do with it, but she still wanted to help it, because despite the horrible things she's been through, it's still her kid, though she doesn't want to think about the fact that that's her kid, but she tries to provide money, like once a month or something, or every other month, to this family, kind of privately, secretly, doesn't want to get involved in any way, shape, or form with the kid. But it's handled with nuance and grace, and it was a amazing, wonderful section of the book with Gruntle and Stony, and just to see these two characters that you really care about deal with something that, considerably does happen in real life. Again, this is stuff that's very human. There's less fantastical stuff happening in this first half, and more just like real day to day, like, yeah, this stuff, and it was really good. We get mentions of Greymane, which again is an Esselmont pretty much character. So, connections being made. You would hear Greymane and be like, oh, okay, that's a character, that's a name. But you wouldn't... My eyes lit up more because I know who that is, because I read the Esselmont books. But if you don't know who that is, then, just kind of be like, okay, cool. Moving on. We have... Now, this has been happening a lot, where we've had epigraphs by this guy named Fisher, at least for the past couple books. Now, Fisher, we learn, is a bard, and he actually shows up in this particular scene and talks to Ducaire about, their jobs, their professions, him being a historian, and kind of, it's just like, you keep looking at all the negative things with this, but, and you keep trying to, like, honor everybody's memory and say everything as objectively as possible, but Ducaire, you were only human and you were emotionally involved with a lot of the characters involved. You're not going to be able to do this succinctly, so don't tell other people's stories. Just tell it from your perspective. And let me be the voice to share it. I thought it was I'm kind of paraphrasing that, but it was a beautiful scene between the two of them. Traveler ends up meeting up with Samar Dev, which is really cool. We get to see this awesome scene where Karsa frees people from slavery, just completely, utterly, with ease, saves these people from slavery, and says, I wish you the best, have a good life, enjoy it fully and utterly while you can, because I will return in time, and I will slaughter and murder you all. But I sincerely actually wish you a good life until I return. And that is the dichotomy of Karsa Orlong for you, where I'm somehow rooting for this man to end the world. Because he may not be the crippled god. In fact, he actively doesn't like the crippled god. Karsa doesn't like civilization. His entire motivation is to return to his people, build up an army, come back, and destroy civilization in every single part of the world until everything is back to its baser nature, where he believes everything will be made right. Which will involve a bunch of slaughter and genocide. But yet, he will fight for you beforehand to make sure you are not a slave, to make sure you have a decent life prior to his plan. He's such a fascinating character, and yet somehow I root for him. Even though most of our characters would probably be against him. We also get reintroduced to Kaladin Brood, who we have not seen since Memories of Ice, which I've kind of envisioned them both as barbaric kind of people, right? So I guess I see Karsa as more of that Conan insert. So I guess I would make Kaladin Brood be more of the Kroll character, which is also connected to the Conan stuff, if you know what I'm talking about. But they're both kind of like those big muscly guys. Then we get the epic crossover of, Traveler's been traveling with Samar, and Samar and Traveler meet up with Karsa. Worlds collide, and it's a fun time. Krupi and Baruch have a nice conversation. And I don't know if this is a flashback or current. See, sometimes my mind just, I don't know if it's external factors like my dog's barking or stuff going on outside, or, maybe I'm just not in the right headspace, but sometimes I just get absolutely confused in what I'm reading. Like, I understand what I'm reading, but I also, don't. So there's a scene with Andrus, Silchus Ruin, and Anamander talking, and I don't know if that's meant to be the past or the present. I clearly missed something at some point, but it was still a great discussion and an interesting scene nonetheless. I'm going to assume it was the past till told otherwise. So we have this whole thing with Sodoman and this other girl, Silcha, I forget her name, but I didn't write it down either. But there's this whole thing with the cult of Redeemer. This is multifaceted, a lot to do with, forgiveness, compassion, and grace. And when is forgiving too much? Who has the right to forgive? Should certain things even be forgiven? But it is also rather a critique. I mean, it seems pretty specific to Christianity in terms of the redemption whole idea, because it's not really a thing in Judaism. It's not really a thing in Islam. And a lot of the Buddhist religions don't really have those concepts either. It's mainly just a Christian idea. Catholic, Christian, whatever, Protestant, whatever you want to call it, it's that sort of thing. And the critique seems to be, at least for that particular, it's multifaceted, this conversation that he's having with us, Stephen Erickson, through the lens of the story. But very much at least the central thing seemed to be, it's stupid for a god to be able to just absolve you of all you've done wrong, and therefore you are redeemed, you are forgiven, you are good. Because what about all those people that you made suffer, all this and that? Why is that okay? But also in the world of Malazan, as far as I'm aware, none of these gods have existed forever. None of these gods actually created the world. We have this idea that Mother Dark may have created the universe as we understand it. That's what we're told. We don't really have any proof of that at the particular moment. But most of the gods that we get introduced to were created. They were not always a god. So under that viewpoint, yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say that. But also, just for the sake of argument, because I know most of the people reading this series probably aren't religious, but, if you're going to critique something, you got to critique it from in the framework as well. For the sake of argument, this is real. So why you could argue in Star Wars, that doesn't make sense within the context of Star Wars, because this is not how the Force works, as Harrison Ford says in Episode 7 or whatever. don't like that movie. I'm just using that for a reference point, right? But you have to critique within what the universe says, because obviously the Force doesn't exist, Jedi don't exist. But if you are playing within the framework of the narrative, then you must, for the sake of argument, preclude that all that stuff is real. For the discussion to be had. So in the same way, it doesn't matter whether you believe in the Bible or anything or not, but if you're going to critique against it, you have to argue within it. So in the Bible's case, though, it is not a God that was created, it is a God that has always existed, that created everything, that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and the whole thing is that it's not freely paid off. You're not just forgiven, done, all good. Somebody else had to pay the crime, had to do the time, had to pay the bill. It's not, you don't just get to eat a free meal and bail. No, it's you ate the free meal and someone else paid for the food, right? So what is justice? What is necessary to absolve someone of such guilt or such thing? I don't know. I mean, we forgive people for a lot of things, and the justice system that we have, at least in America, a lot of times you do something, depending on what it is, and you get a bail. If you can pay off this $5 billion, you get off scot-free. Oh, you work at Walmart? I guess you're going to jail because you don't own that kind of money. Unless you just happen to have a billionaire friend who's like, sure, I'll pay off that $5 million bail, and there's nothing people can do. If somebody brings the money and pays it off, you're free. It's as simple as that. That's how it works, right? And there's other stuff that goes into that. There's different factors, but that's the general principle. So I would say with Octavian, who was not always a god, who was at one point mortal, yeah, I don't think, sure, he sacrificed himself, but I don't think anything he did can make up for the multitudes of sin or wrongdoing across the entire spectrum of the entire world. So I think that's objectively fair, because Octavian has not always existed. He's a finite being that may exist now forever, but he had a starting point. So he cannot encapsulate all wrongdoings across all time and space because he didn't always exist. See the difference? So on that point, I'd be completely with Erickson with that critique of religion. With the Bible, though, I don't think that argument is sound, because it's a different sort of God. It's a different sort of being. It's a being that has always existed and can put all the punishment on himself as to pay for the price of everyone in the entire universe, in time, place, setting, whatever, because it's a different type of God in that scenario. It's not more of a... Because the gods in Erickson's books are more of the Greek variety, where they, have their own motivations, their own goals. They're not all morally correct, whatever that means. Then it got into stuff about corruption of religion, but I, again, would just go back to, sin, right? Because people are not good. It's not the problem. If the religion teaches you to stab people every Tuesday night in the gut, then, yeah, I say that's a flaw of the religion. But if the religion never asks you to do that, and you're doing that, then that's something wrong with you, and you specifically. It's the same thing with saying, oh, my son played GTA 5, and he shot up a stripper, therefore, it's GTA 5's fault that my son went to an actual strip club and shot a stripper. No, there's something wrong with your son. There's nothing wrong with the game. It's something wrong with your son that he's going to get from that game, that he should go do that. And the Bible doesn't even do anything like that specifically. But it'd be the same sort of paradigm. Or you read Malazan, you saw rape, therefore you went and raped someone. No, that's not Stephen Erickson's fault. That is your fault. You see what I'm saying? As for the case of, forgiveness, grace, redemption, what does redemption even mean? All this stuff's fascinating and interesting. I would say, yes, if it is just humans that are to determine it, who can really say what should be forgiven, what shouldn't be forgiven, in any given circumstance? I don't know. Redemption is certainly a process. It is something that you have to continuously work toward, which is something, again, that was critiqued. But again, this is people who don't really understand religion or don't understand what they're critiquing. I'd say in that instance, it's not that, oh, Jesus forgives you, therefore you can just go about your life and do whatever the hell you want, right? Now that you've been forgiven. The idea, again, this is, you don't have to accept anything. This is just, if you're going to actually critique it correctly, within the framework, it is, you are forgiven of all wrongdoings up to that point, and the good works you do after is not to win brownie points with your God. It is the good works are going to come naturally from following said God, because the Holy Spirit or the God within you will work through you to provide those good deeds in honor of the grace that's been given to you. Not because it's, what is more, and this is something that the series has done before. What is what is more special, someone doing something because they want something good to come out of it, or doing something good because it is inherently good. And this is something that people that critique things seem to misunderstand, that it's not you are doing good works in order to get to heaven. No, it's this person paid it, you're good, you're doing good works in honor of what's been done for you. If somebody can forgive you for all the crap that you've done, then surely you can be a good neighbor to everyone else. That's kind of the mindset. You get what I'm saying? I'm gonna get off this topic though. I didn't want this all to be a religious hour or anything. I'm saying that was very much the focal point of that particular thing. And again, it was more than that. It was more nuanced than that. It was about a whole multifaceted of things, but that was definitely a central part of it. And I'm sure a lot of people can be like, well, that's deep and da 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 da. This is stuff I've heard a lot from, atheist Christian debates, atheist Muslim debate, atheist this, atheist that. I've watched a lot of things, read a lot of things. I've seen this before, so it's not, to me, as big as a philosophical point as I think other people feel like that particular section is. I think it's good. I think it's the most nuanced I've ever seen in a fantasy fiction setting, but it's still something you would easily see in like a 2-hour debate with someone. So, anyway, let me get off this point. Moving forward, Traveler and Karsa get along really well, and they're like best buds, and I live for that. Along with Traveler basically tells Karsa the plot of Return of the Crimson Guard. I mean, he doesn't, but he mentions his friend and the stuff that happened, and they don't fully go into detail because he's sad about it. But if you've read Return of the Crimson Guard, then you would know why he's sad. And again, I said before, but we learn much more about Caliban through Traveler. And one of the more interesting parts was how he talked about like Lysine not doing it right because she kind of tried to rule with an iron fist. But Caliban, what he wanted to do was more subtle, because he's like, well, if I'm going to enforce my will upon other places that aren't as close to home, like the Malaz Empire is, like 7 cities, what he would do more, it's kind of like more what the Bene Gesserit do in Dune, where he would have certain people show up to that particular section, talk to local people in charge, and kind of get them to sway to do things a certain way. So that way, if anger arises, it's not at Emperor Caliban, because they don't even really know that he's the one ruling them. It's more at their current leadership. There's a little bit more nuance there to that, but it was just really interesting how, Caliban seemed to really just play 4D chess with everyone and really wanted to, be more subtle about his rule over everything than Lysine seemed to be. But also, Shadowthrone, again, this is, again, going back to all these years, differences between people. Shadowthrone really doesn't seem anything like Caliban. Shadowthrone seems extremely arrogant, which maybe Caliban was, but from what we've heard, it doesn't seem to be the case. I guess we'll see when we read Asimon's prequel books. But, and he just seems kind of he does a little a lot, and just seems really arrogant and self-centered, and kind of crazy, which maybe that was Caliban the whole time, but I got a sneaking feeling that Ascending just really made him different. But I guess we'll maybe see, maybe we won't. Sometimes the series doesn't fully address everything that I have questions about. We also have this whole thing with multitude, with conformity. The more civilized the civilization, the more conformed it becomes. There's this awesome scene with Ascended Octavian and Suradomin when they have a conversation, which was great. There's this really cool scene where this broken god and Namander talk. I don't have too much to say other than it was really well written and it had me tensed up. And then we get this big thing, kind of confusing. So the broken god is actually Belladon, kind of like Nightshield, but also not, because Nightshield was with Silver Fox. Belladon, which was the Toblikai that was with that was the husband of Nightshield, is a son, but isn't a son. This is where I'm kind of... So it's him, or is it his son, or is because he's this new form, is calling himself a son? Not exactly sure. But Belladon, as far as I'm aware, is the broken god. And he wants to create a puppet like Hairlock, because he knows that Hairlock transferred his soul over. And he kind of wants like a perfect body again because he's broken or something like that. A bit confused, but that's basically the gist. The biggest thing I got out of that is that the broken god, which is completely separate from the crippled god, is Belladon, who we haven't seen since Gardens of the Moon. So that's something. And then we end with Calor's vow, because this is a thing I was confused about before. The Crippled God and Calor are separate things, which I've since learned my lesson from My Memories of Ice video. But Calor was cursed by Kroll to never be able to like rise up and have a huge empire again and be in control of everything. So Calor makes a vow at the end of this section to be like, well, if I can't rule everything, I will basically burn everything to the ground. And that will be a perfect broken throne to sit upon, is one where everybody's broken, everything's destroyed, which even if he's not an ally of the crippled god, which I think he is, I don't know, that's still a bit confusing. He's definitely would do something that I think the crippled god would approve of. So, I don't know. Also, will Carcel let that happen? Because he certainly won't want his civilization to go that far down. So, I don't know. I guess we'll see. We got to read more. But that's it for my thoughts on that first half of this book. And we made it to 40 minutes. We'll see how long part 2 happens to be. But that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, I wasn't trying to preach to you or anything like that. It was just something that, in that particular section with Octavian stuff, it just kind of like was something I wanted to address because, I listen to 10 Very Big Books podcasts as well, as along with other Malazan YouTubers, and I don't think they really address this stuff from that particular angle. So I thought, hey, well, at least I give my unique perspective, right? Because that's what we're all here for. You want to hear different perspectives, different views on these books from different people. That's the whole point you watch reviews for, right? Especially if you've already read these books, already have an opinion. I'm loving these books and everything. So I just didn't want it to feel like, because I don't usually do that. I don't usually bring that stuff into it, but I just thought it was relevant to that particular topic. But yeah, I'm absolutely loving the book so far. I really don't know where it's going. I'm excited to see where it will conclude. And then I'm so close to the end. Then I only have 2 books left. And I can say that I have finally read all of the Book of the Fallen, and I'm quite excited to get there. But we still got the second half of Toll the Hounds to see, so I'll let you know what I think about that next time. Till then, guys.